He had always been different from the others, though not in a way that made people notice at first. He was quiet, thoughtful, and seemed to drift through life as if he was walking to the beat of his own rhythm. While others played games, argued over trivial things, or chased popularity, he sat in the corner of the park or in his small room with a notebook and a guitar. Music was his world. It was the one place where he could speak without words, where emotions flowed freely and understood themselves. His family noticed it too, but they didn't always understand. They would often tell him to focus on practical things, to think about a career that would provide stability. But he knew that music wasn't just a hobby. It wasn't just a way to pass time. Music was who he was. When he strummed the strings of his old, worn guitar, the notes seemed to carry pieces of his heart into the air. The sound would fill the room and make even the smallest moments feel larger than life. Yet he had to keep it quiet, for not everyone valued what he loved. At school, he was often ignored or teased. Some classmates whispered about him behind his back, calling him strange or useless. Their words cut, but he tried not to let them. Still, each laugh, each smirk, lingered in his mind, making him question if he was foolish for dreaming so boldly. Every evening, after school and after helping around the house, he would retreat to his room. It was small, with walls decorated by scribbles of lyrics he wrote and old posters of musicians he admired. The guitar sat in the corner, its strings worn from countless nights of playing. He would close the door, turn on a small lamp, and let his fingers wander across the strings. At first, the melodies were simple, sometimes shaky, but with each note he felt lighter, as if the weight of the world lifted off his shoulders. Music became a friend, a companion, and a confidant. There was a particular evening that stayed in his memory. He had spent the day at school, enduring teasing from classmates who found joy in mocking anyone who was different. Even the teacher seemed to overlook him, too busy managing the louder, more boisterous students. He went home feeling small and invisible. His mother asked how his day was, and he gave the usual quiet response, not wanting to burden anyone with his thoughts. Once in his room, he picked up his guitar and strummed a few chords. At first, nothing happened. His mind was heavy, clouded with the words and laughter that had followed him all day. But slowly, a melody began to form, tentative at first, and then stronger, bolder. It was as if the music understood him better than anyone else ever could. Tears welled up in his eyes, but they were not tears of sadness alone. They were tears of release, of relief, knowing that he was not truly alone. He often wrote lyrics along with his melodies. Some were about things that had happened to him, the quiet hurts and moments of loneliness. Others were dreams, hopes, and little sparks of joy that only he could see in the world. He would write them down in his notebook, trying to put his feelings into words. Many times, he would read them back and feel proud, feeling that he had captured a piece of himself. Yet deep down he knew that sharing them with others was terrifying. The world had laughed at him before. He wasn't sure he had the courage to let it happen again, despite the teasing and the doubts. He never stopped imagining a future where his music could reach people. He would sit by the window at night, watching the city lights twinkle, and thinking about a stage, a crowd, and the feeling of people listening, really listening to what he had to say. He imagined the look of surprise, maybe even admiration, in the eyes of those who had mocked him. But even as he dreamed, a small voice whispered that it was foolish, that maybe he was chasing something impossible. He tried to push it away and focus on the music, because it was the only thing that made sense. School was never easy for him. The hallways were filled with laughter and chatter that felt foreign to him. Friends were rare, and even when he tried to connect, he felt like an outsider looking in. The popular students ignored him, and the ones who noticed him often did so only to poke fun. He was called names that stung, told that he was wasting his time, or that his dreams would never matter. Sometimes he would come home feeling hollow, unsure if he had the strength to face another day. But then at night when he held his guitar, those feelings seemed to disappear. The music became armor, a way to protect himself from the harshness of the outside world. His dedication to music was not without sacrifice. He missed gatherings, social events, and even small celebrations with classmates because he spent that time practicing. Some nights he would play until his fingers ached and his throat was sore from singing. but every note, every chord, every lyric mattered. It was his expression, his statement that he existed, that he had something to offer beyond what people could see at first glance. In those moments, he felt alive in a way nothing else could give him. There was a certain magic in the way he composed music. He didn't just play what he heard in other songs. He felt the music first and let it guide his hands. Sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night with a tune in his head, rush to write it down and play it softly so as not to wake anyone. Each melody carried a piece of his soul. He imagined his music reaching others who felt lonely or unheard, hoping that somehow it could connect hearts the way it connected his own. Even though he was isolated, found inspiration in small things. A bird singing outside his window, the rhythm of rain tapping against the roof, a smile from a stranger, or the sound of footsteps echoing in an empty street hall became parts of his music. Life was full of tiny moments that others ignored, but he noticed them, felt them, and turned them into sound. That sensitivity made his music unique, though he wondered if anyone would ever notice it. He kept his dreams mostly to himself. Sharing them felt dangerous, because rejection and ridicule were always possible. He had tried once, in school, to hum a tune he had composed, and the reaction had been laughter and sneers. Since then, he had been careful. His music became private, a sanctuary where he could be free without fear. But the longing to share it, to have it understood, never left him. He knew that somewhere out there, someone would hear it and feel the same way he did. That hope, however faint, kept him going in his small room. Surrounded by his notebooks and his guitar, he imagined a future that felt just out of reach. He pictured himself performing in front of a small audience first, and then perhaps larger ones. He imagined applause, smiles, and even tears from strangers who connected with his melodies. It seemed like a distant dream, almost impossible, yet he held on to it tightly. Music had given him courage he didn't have anywhere else, a courage that whispered that no matter what others thought, he had something meaningful to offer. Some days were harder than others. The teasing at school, the quiet doubts, the fear of being laughed at again, all weighed heavily on him. He sometimes felt invisible, like he didn't belong anywhere. But music reminded him of who he was and what he could become. It was a lifeline, a constant in a world that often felt uncertain and cruel. Every time he played, he felt a spark of hope that he carried with him throughout the day. He also found comfort in observing people from a distance. Watching their expressions, the way they moved, how they reacted to small events, it all inspired him. He would imagine turning these observations into music, translating the world into sound. In this way, even though he felt alone, he felt connected to life itself. Music was a bridge between him and the world, even if the world didn't yet understand him. At night, before he went to bed, he often reflected on the day. He thought about the laughter, the whispers, the moments he had tried to hide, and then he thought about the melodies he had created. He realized that even though the outside world had not yet recognized his talent, he had already achieved something remarkable. He had stayed true to himself, continued to create, and refused to give up. That small victory, though invisible to others, gave him strength. He knew that the path ahead would not be easy. There would be more teasing, more doubt, and more nights of uncertainty. But he also knew that music was his path, his language, and his truth. It had saved him from loneliness, given him a voice, and promised a future where he could be heard. As he closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep, the melodies lingered in his mind, weaving dreams of hope, courage, and the quiet power of staying true to oneself. And even though the world had not yet listened, he knew that one day it would. He had been practicing for months, never letting a single day pass without touching his guitar or jotting down lyrics in his notebook. The melodies had grown stronger, smoother, and more personal. They carried stories from his heart, small moments of hope, tiny sparks of dreams, and even the pain he had learned to live with. And then one day, an unexpected opportunity came. A local community event was being held, and the organizers were looking for someone to perform. The young man hesitated at first. The thought of stepping in front of a crowd terrified him. But there was a small voice inside him that whispered, urging him to try. This could be his chance to finally show the world what he had inside the morning of the event. He woke early, his heart racing with a mix of excitement and fear. He carefully tuned his guitar, making sure every string was perfect. He rehearsed the same song over and over, trying to calm the nerves in his stomach. As he walked to the venue, he felt a mixture of anticipation and doubt. Would anyone listen? Would they care? Or would the laughter he had faced before return to haunt him once more? When he arrived, the place was bustling with people. Children ran around, families chatted, and the air was filled with laughter and music from other performers. He felt small, almost invisible, as if his presence would go unnoticed. But he found a quiet corner backstage and took a deep breath. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the familiar comfort of his guitar calm him. This was his world, his sanctuary. The outside noise mattered less than the music that flowed from him. When it was his turn, he walked onto the small stage. The lights were brighter than he had imagined, and a crowd of curious faces stared at him. He gripped his guitar tightly, his fingers trembling. The first few moments were the hardest. He could hear whispers, see a few people smirking, and the old fear threatened to take over. But then, he remembered why he was there. He remembered the nights spent alone, the melodies that had carried him through loneliness, the notes that had spoken what words could not. He strummed the first chord, and the sound filled the small venue. It was soft at first, almost timid, but it carried honesty. At first, the reaction was not what he had hoped for. Some people laughed quietly, whispering to each other. A few shook their heads, and one person even scoffed. The laughter hit him harder than he expected. He felt his face burn, and for a moment, he wanted to run off the stage and never look back. But he took a deep breath, reminding himself that music was not about approval. It was about truth. And in that moment, he decided to play not for them, but for himself. As he continued, the melody grew stronger. He poured everything into his playing, the pain, the hope, the dreams. The notes carried a weight of sincerity that could not be ignored. Slowly, some of the whispers faded. A few people leaned forward, curious about the sound they were hearing. It was different from anything else around them, raw and heartfelt. He could feel the energy shifting in the room. The laughter was still there, but now it was mixed with attention, a slow acknowledgement of something genuine. He sang the lyrics he had written late at night, words that spoke of struggle, of feeling unseen, and of small victories. His voice was not perfect, but it carried emotion that connected with those who listened. Some faces softened, some eyes glistened with surprise, and for the first time, he felt seen not by everyone, but by enough to matter. The song ended, and there was a brief pause, a moment of silence that felt like it stretched forever. Then, a few people clapped. It was not loud, not overwhelming, but it was real. He felt a spark of hope, a tiny flicker, that maybe, just maybe, he had made a difference. After he stepped off the stage, he felt a strange mix of relief and doubt. He had survived the laughter, but he also knew the road ahead would not be easy. Some people would still mock him, still question his choices. But he realized that the act of standing there, performing his truth, was a victory in itself. Backstage, a few attendees came up to him, offering kind words, smiling, or asking to hear more. Their support, though small, felt like a lifeline. It reminded him that not everyone was cruel, that there were people who could feel the depth of his music in the days that followed, could not stop thinking about the performance. He replayed the melodies in his mind, the way some faces had softened, the brief claps, and the whispers of appreciation. It had not been a huge triumph, but it was a start. He realized that progress often came in small, quiet steps, not sudden leaps. Each note he played, each song he shared, could plant a seed that might grow into understanding and recognition over time. He began to spend more time refining his craft. He experimented with different chords, tried singing in new ways, and even wrote songs inspired by the people he observed around him. Each melody became a reflection of life, a story waiting to be told. He discovered that his music was not only a personal refuge, but also a bridge to others. The more he shared it, the more he felt a connection forming between him and those who listened. Even if it was only a small audience at first, despite the small successes, fear and doubt still lingered. Every time he considered performing in front of others again, his stomach twisted with nerves. He worried about judgment, about ridicule, about failing once more. Yet he reminded himself that the act of creating and sharing was itself an achievement. The courage to face the world, to play his truth despite fear, something that could not be taken away. He also learned to observe reactions carefully. Not everyone would appreciate his music, and that was okay. Some people would laugh, some would walk away, and some would simply not understand. But the ones who listened, even quietly, were worth the effort. Those moments of connection, however brief, were powerful and meaningful. They reminded him that the world could be more than a place of judgment and mockery. There were listeners who felt, who understood, and who valued authenticity. The young man began to think about the future differently. The fear of laughter did not vanish, but it became a challenge to face rather than a barrier. He realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. Music had given him a voice, and he could not silence it for anyone. Each song, each performance, was a testament to resilience and hope. One afternoon, as he practiced in his room, he received unexpected encouragement from a neighbor who had heard him play through an open window. The neighbor praised his talent and suggested he record his music to share online. At first he hesitated, imagining the same mockery he had faced at the event. But then he remembered the feeling of being heard, the spark of acknowledgement, and he felt a surge of determination. Maybe this was another chance, another step toward reaching people who could feel his music the way he did. He spent hours recording small clips of his songs, carefully choosing the best takes. He shared them quietly, not expecting much, but hoping that someone, somewhere, would connect with the emotion behind the melodies. Slowly, he began to receive messages of support from strangers who had listened and felt moved. Their words, often simple, carried immense encouragement. For the first time, he realized that music could travel beyond walls, beyond the people who doubted him, and touch hearts in ways he had only dreamed of. Through all this, he remained humble, focused on growth rather than fame. He understood that the journey was more important than the destination. Each challenge, each laugh, each small victory shaped him, taught him resilience, and strengthened his bond with music. He learned to appreciate the small moments, the quiet gestures of support, and the personal triumphs that no one else might notice, but that mattered deeply to him. The event, though nerve-wracking and humbling, became a turning point. It reminded him that the world could be harsh, but it could also be beautiful and receptive. It showed him that authenticity, courage, and persistence could create change, even in the face of mockery. He realized that the melody was more than notes and chords. It was a story, a voice, and a bridge connecting him to life and to others. In the quiet of his room, after another day of practice, he reflected on the journey so far. The laughter that once felt crushing no longer held the same power. He understood that the opinions of those who mocked him were fleeting, but the music he created, the emotions he shared, and the courage he cultivated would remain with him forever. With each chord and lyric, he felt more confident, more grounded, and more ready to face whatever came next. After his first performance, he thought the worst of the laughter was behind him. But he soon realized that fear and doubt could return at any time. Even though a few people had shown support, the echo of the mocking words still lingered in his mind. He would catch himself replaying the laughter in his head, imagining the sneers and the smirks as if they were happening all over again. Some days it felt heavier than any melody could lift. He began to question himself, wondering if he had misjudged his talent, if his dreams were just foolish fantasies. The isolation he had once felt returned, even though he now had evidence that some people appreciated his music. The fear that he would never truly be understood crept in, making him hesitant to share his songs again. He spent hours alone, reflecting on his journey. He thought about the nights he had spent practicing, the moments when music had been the only thing keeping him afloat. It had been his refuge, his safe place, but even that felt fragile now. He realized that creating music was not enough. He had to be brave enough to face the world with it, to expose his heart to judgment, praise, or indifference. That realization weighed on him. making each day feel like a battle between hope and fear. Despite the doubts, he could not stop playing. Music was not something he could abandon, even if it terrified him. Each day, he would pick up his guitar and let his fingers move across the strings, searching for melodies that spoke his truth. The notes became a mirror of his feelings, reflecting sadness, frustration, longing, sometimes fleeting moments of joy. It was through these melodies that he could process his emotions, confront his insecurities, and find small pieces of courage he never knew he had. Music became more than a passion, it became his way of understanding himself. At school, things had not changed much. Some students still whispered, some still sneered, and some barely noticed him at all. He kept his head down most of the time, focusing on his studies and his music. But there were moments when he caught glimpses of curiosity in the eyes of others. A classmate would hum a tune he recognized, or someone would glance at him with a hint of interest when they saw him writing in his notebook. These small gestures were like sparks in the dark, brief reminders that not everyone was dismissive, and that connection was possible if he kept trying. One afternoon, he was invited to participate in a small local music competition. It was not a big stage, just a modest gathering, but it felt like another step into the unknown. He hesitated, torn between the fear of humiliation and the desire to be heard. The memory of the laughter from his first performance still haunted him. But he remembered the quiet support he had received from a few kind strangers. That encouragement gave him a fragile courage. He decided to take the risk, knowing that even if things went wrong, the act of trying was a victory in itself. In the days leading up to the competition, he practiced more intensely than ever. He experimented with different chords and harmonies, refined his lyrics, and allowed himself to express feelings he had kept hidden. The music became deeper, richer, and more honest. He poured into it all of the pain, fear, hope, and longing that had shaped him. Each song was a reflection of his journey, a narrative of someone who had faced rejection but refused to be silenced. He began to see that vulnerability was not weakness, but a source of strength. When the day of the competition arrived, his nerves were raw. The venue was small but crowded, and he could hear the chatter and laughter of people before he even stepped onto the stage. He felt his heart pound and his stomach twist. But he took a deep breath and reminded himself why he was there: not to impress anyone, not to prove anyone wrong, but to share a piece of his heart through music. That thought steadied him, giving him a sense of purpose that outweighed the fear as he began to play. He felt the familiar comfort of his guitar under his fingers. The first few chords were hesitant, trembling slightly as if echoing his anxiety. But as he continued, the music began to flow more freely, carrying his emotions into the room. The lyrics told of struggle, of feeling unseen, and of holding on to hope despite doubt. There was honesty in every note, a rawness that could not be faked or ignored. Some people in the audience leaned forward, curious, drawn to the sincerity in his performance. Others remained skeptical, whispering and exchanging glances. The mixture of reactions reminded him that the world was complex, and not everyone would understand, but that was not the point. The point was to be true to himself. Midway through the song, something shifted. He saw a few people wiping their eyes, clearly moved by the melody and the story it carried. The atmosphere changed, becoming quieter and more attentive. The whispers of doubt were replaced by a sense of connection. For the first time, he realized that music could transcend judgment, reaching people in ways words alone could not. He felt a surge of courage, and his playing became more confident, more expressive. He allowed himself to fully immerse in the performance, letting go of fear and letting the music speak. By the time the song ended, the audience was silent for a moment, as if holding their breath. Then, applause began to ripple through the room. It was not a thunderous ovation, but it was heartfelt, genuine, enough to make him realize that his music had touched people. The validation was not in the number of hands clapping, but in the understanding that someone had felt what he had felt, that a connection had been made. It was a quiet, powerful triumph. After the performance, he was approached by several people who offered kind words, asked about his songs, and expressed genuine interest in hearing more. Each interaction felt like a small victory, a confirmation that his voice mattered, that his music could make a difference. He realized that fear of judgment would always exist, but courage and perseverance could carve a path through it. The act of sharing his art, even in the face of uncertainty, was a form of triumph that could not be taken away. In the weeks following the competition, he continued to practice and compose new music. He experimented with different styles, wrote lyrics that reflected both personal experiences and observations of the world, and began to record small demos. The music was becoming more refined, more expressive, and more capable of conveying the depth of his emotions. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth. The fear that had once paralyzed him was now tempered by the knowledge that bravery was cultivated through action, not absence of doubt. He also began to reflect on the lessons he had learned. Rejection and ridicule were inevitable parts of life, but they did not define him. His worth was not determined by the opinions of those who mocked him, but by his dedication, authenticity, and willingness to persevere. Music had taught him resilience, patience, and the power of expressing truth even when the world was unkind. These lessons shaped not only his music, but his outlook on life, instilling a quiet confidence that grew steadily over time. Sometimes, he would think back to the nights when he first played alone in his room, feeling invisible and uncertain. He realized that those moments had been essential, forming the foundation of his strength and creativity. Without those solitary nights, the courage to face a crowd, to share his music, might never have emerged. He understood that the journey itself, with its struggles and doubts, was as important as any recognition he might receive. Even as he gained more confidence, he remained humble. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, that not every audience would respond with understanding or warmth. But he also knew that each performance, each note played, and each song shared was a step forward. The process of creating, sharing, and connecting was its own reward, independent of fame or approval. This understanding allowed him to continue his journey with a sense of purpose and inner peace. He began to dream bigger, imagining larger audiences, more opportunities to share his music, and the possibility of reaching people far beyond his small community. Yet he approached these dreams with caution and thoughtfulness, recognizing that success was not measured solely by numbers or applause, but by the ability to touch hearts and inspire courage. His music had become more than a hobby. It was a mission, a calling that guided his actions and decisions. In his quiet moments, he reflected on the journey so far, the teasing, the laughter, the small victories, and the moments of connection. He realized that every experience, no matter how painful or joyous, had contributed to his growth. The laughter that once seemed so crushing now served as a reminder of how far he had come, how much resilience he had developed, and how powerful authenticity could be. He understood that life would continue to present challenges, but he was better equipped to face them, armed with courage, creativity, and a deep connection to his music. Through it all, he never lost sight of why he started playing music in the first place. It was not for fame, recognition, or approval. It was for the pure, unfiltered joy of expressing himself, for the healing power it provided, and for the hope that his melodies could reach others who felt unseen or unheard. That understanding grounded him, providing clarity and motivation as he navigated the complexities of life. Art and self-discovery as he continued to play, compose, and share his music, he grew stronger, more confident, and more aware of the impact his art could have. He understood that the journey would be long and sometimes difficult, but the rewards, connection, understanding, and personal growth were immeasurable. Each note, each lyric, and each performance became a testament to perseverance, courage, and the transformative power of music. And in the quiet moments when he played alone in his room or walked through the streets, humming a new tune, he felt a sense of fulfillment and hope that carried him forward into the next chapter of his life. The days following the competition were filled with quiet determination. He returned to his small room every evening, sitting cross-legged on the floor with his guitar resting on his knees. His fingers moved skillfully across the strings, producing melodies that were richer and more expressive than ever. He spent hours experimenting with chords, writing lyrics, and recording small fragments of songs on his old phone. The process was exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. Each melody felt like a small step toward something greater, something he could not yet fully see. One afternoon, while browsing through a small online forum for musicians, he found a thread where people shared their music and offered feedback. At first, he hesitated, imagining the same ridicule he had faced at the live performance. But a small spark of courage pushed him forward. He uploaded a short recording of a melody he'd been working on, a simple tune filled with the emotions he had carried for years. He posted it without expectation, not knowing if anyone would even listen. To his surprise, the response was quiet at first but gradually grew. A few comments appeared praising the honesty and beauty of his music. One person wrote that the melody had made them feel understood in a way they had not felt for years. Another said it brought tears to their eyes. Each comment was like a small ray of light cutting through the shadows of doubt that had lingered for so long. He felt a thrill of hope he had never experienced before. A confirmation that his music could reach people even beyond the small community he had always known. Encouraged by the feedback, he began sharing more recordings. He uploaded songs with lyrics that spoke of loneliness, struggle, and the quiet strength needed to face life's challenges. He shared melodies inspired by simple observations of birds singing in the morning, the gentle sway of trees in the wind, the distant sound of laughter from a neighborhood street. Each recording was infused with authenticity. Each comment, no matter how brief, reminded him that his music was touching hearts. With every post, his confidence grew. He started to imagine performing again, not just for a few people at a small event, but for an audience that might truly understand the depth of his melodies. The idea still brought a flutter of nerves, but it was now accompanied by excitement and a sense of purpose. He began to think about creating a small collection of songs, a series of melodies that told his story from the quiet beginnings of his passion to the courage he was learning to embrace. One evening, he decided to write a new melody, one that carried everything he had felt in the past years. He closed his eyes and let his fingers move freely across the strings, allowing the emotions to guide him rather than following any predetermined structure. The notes came slowly at first, hesitant and fragile, but then they flowed with a strength and clarity that surprised even him. The melody was raw, honest, and deeply personal. He felt as if he was pouring a piece of his soul into every chord, every pause, every subtle shift in rhythm. Once the melody was complete, he hesitated before recording it. This was different from anything he had shared before. It was not just a song, it was a statement of his journey, a reflection of his struggles and his resilience. But he pressed record, letting the music speak for him. The recording captured the essence of everything he had lived. Every moment of doubt, every tear shed in solitude, every spark of hope that had carried him forward. When he uploaded the melody, he did not expect much. Yet within hours, messages began to appear. People wrote about how the music moved them, how it reminded them of their own struggles, and how it gave them a sense of connection. One person wrote that listening to the melody felt like someone had reached into their heart and understood them completely. Another said it brought comfort on a day when they felt most alone. The words were simple, but they carried immense power, giving him a sense of validation he had never known before. The young man realized that the laughter and mockery he had faced were only part of the story. There were listeners who could hear the truth in his melodies, who could feel the emotions he poured into his music, and who could connect with him in ways that words alone could not achieve. That understanding transformed his perspective. The fear of ridicule became less important, overshadowed by the realization that his music had the power to touch lives, to offer solace, and to create bonds that transcended distance and difference. He began to explore new ways of sharing his music. He recorded videos of himself playing, capturing the subtle expressions on his face, the intensity of his focus, and the emotion behind each note. He shared these videos online, not for fame or recognition, but to let people experience the music as he felt it. The responses were overwhelming. People from different parts of the world reached out, sharing their own stories of struggle and hope, and expressing how deeply his melodies resonated with them. It was a revelation. He realized that his music had become a bridge, connecting hearts and lives in ways he had never imagined. The experience also taught him about the importance of patience and persistence. Success did not arrive suddenly. It came in small, quiet steps. Each melody shared, each recording uploaded, each moment of vulnerability posted online was a building block, slowly creating a foundation of connection and understanding. He understood that the journey itself, with all its uncertainties, was a crucial part of the story. The act of creating and sharing, even when the response was uncertain, was itself a triumph. As the weeks passed, he noticed a change in himself. The fear that had once held him back began to fade, replaced by a quiet confidence and a sense of purpose. He was still humble, aware of the many challenges ahead, but he felt stronger, more grounded, and more certain of his path. Music was no longer just a personal refuge, it was a way to engage with the world, to offer hope and connection, and to express a truth that transcended words. One day, while walking through the neighborhood, he heard a familiar tune being hummed by a passerby. It was one of his melodies. The realization struck him with a mix of awe and humility. His music had reached someone, it's inspired them, and become a part of their life. It was a confirmation that the journey, with all its struggles and fears, was worth it. The melodies he had nurtured in solitude were now living beyond his room, touching hearts and creating impact. This experience marked a turning point. He understood that music was not about perfection, approval, or recognition. It was about honesty, courage, and the willingness to share oneself with the world. Every note played, every song written, and every melody shared was a step toward connection and understanding. The laughter of the past no longer held power over him. It had become a reminder of the obstacles he had overcome and the resilience he had developed. Encouraged by this new perspective, he began composing a full collection of songs, each reflecting a chapter of his journey. Some songs captured moments of doubt and loneliness, others celebrated small victories and glimpses of hope. Each melody was carefully crafted, infused with emotion, designed to resonate with listeners who might feel unseen or unheard. He poured his heart into every song, guided by the belief that music could create understanding and connection in a world that often overlooked quiet voices. He also began to collaborate with other musicians online, sharing ideas, learning new techniques, and discovering ways to enrich his compositions. These collaborations broadened his perspective and enhanced his music, introducing new textures, harmonies, and rhythms that deepened the emotional impact of his work. Through these experiences, he realized that music was a shared journey, a dialogue between hearts and minds that transcended distance, culture, and circumstance. With each passing day, the young man grew more confident and more inspired. He began to dream not only of sharing his music with larger audiences, but also of inspiring others to pursue their own passions. Regardless of fear or doubt, he understood that the true power of music lay not in fame or recognition, but in its ability to heal, connect, and empower. The melodies he had once played in solitude were now voices of resilience, hope, and authenticity, reaching beyond his room, beyond his town, and into the hearts of people who needed them most, in the quiet moments. When he played alone and reflected on his journey, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey from isolation and ridicule to connection and impact had taught him lessons that went far beyond music. He had learned courage, patience, perseverance, and the value of authenticity. He understood that the world could be harsh, but it could also be deeply receptive to truth, vulnerability, and sincerity. And in that understanding, he found both peace and purpose. Ready to continue sharing his melodies with the world, after the small competition, he felt a quiet shift inside himself. For the first time, he realized that music could reach beyond his room, beyond the people who had laughed at him, and touch hearts in ways he had only imagined. He spent hours every day playing, writing, and recording, each melody carrying pieces of his heart. He was no longer playing just to comfort himself. He was playing to share his world, to connect with others who might understand what it was like to feel invisible. One afternoon, he decided to record a melody he had been developing for weeks. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, but as he played, the notes gained strength and confidence. He poured into it everything he felt: loneliness, hope, frustration, and longing. The melody was simple, yet it had a depth that surprised him. For the first time, he realized that his music could speak without words, that the emotions behind the chords could reach someone else's heart even if they never met him. He uploaded the recording online, unsure if anyone would listen. At first, there were only a few views and comments, but then more began to appear. People wrote that the melody was touching, that it felt honest and real. One person said it reminded them of a time when they felt unseen. Another wrote that it made them feel calm and understood. Each comment gave him a small thrill, a sense that his music had the power to connect. It was proof that even a quiet person who had been laughed at and ignored could reach out and touch others. Encouraged by the response, he began sharing more songs. Each melody told a story: the quiet nights of practice, the moments of self-doubt, the little sparks of hope that kept him going. Some songs were slow and reflective. Others carried a gentle energy, capturing the rhythm of life as he experienced it. With every upload, he felt a stronger connection to the world, a bridge forming between his heart and the hearts of strangers who listened